Nobody knows what's going to happen and nobody knows what the future will bring, but the models really go in one direction, and the direction is towards political violence. And the question is, when are they going to get sick of living like this?
Stephen Marche.
Stephen Marche.
Stephen Marche.
Stephen Marche is a novelist and essayist, and the author of The Next Civil War, The Last Election, and Gloves Off. His books include novels and essay collections, cultural impact, and societal issues. Marche's versatility as an author is evident in the range of topics he tackles.
Living in an authoritarian state is garbage. Why can't our children go to school without worrying about being shot? Problem is, when the violence starts, the attempts to suppress violence lead to more violence. I don't really like predictions because you're always wrong. And if you're right, it's just an accident. Nobody knows what the future's going to bring. They're really hurting poor people in a way that is not make any sense. It's not helping the nation, but they're still doing it anyway. It makes a little more sense the farther we go along here.
Welcome to the Interesting MD podcast, the show about what doctors do when we aren't seeing patients and how this can help us find balance and prevent burnout. I'm your host, Rob Beck. This new episode that we have, this is going to be part of a series of shows that I'm going to do over the course of the next few weeks that are going to answer a question that I've been getting a lot. What the hell is happening in the United States? The answer is I really don't know. There are a lot of people who are much smarter than I am, who have their finger on the pulse of things and are much more educated in these topics and issues. One of them is the guest for today. His name is Stephen Marche. This is a 2-part episode that we're going to release part 1 this week, part 2 next week. And he is a Canadian, but he is a novelist, an essayist, and a cultural commentator. As you are going to find, he is extraordinarily intelligent, he is extraordinarily well-read, and he has a really interesting perspective on things in the United States. So why having him on a show about doctors? Why do we have a Canadian novelist on? I have recently read some books by him. One is The Next Civil War, Dispatches from the American Future. And the other one is The Last Election. I just found that one just because I really enjoyed The Next Civil War and I thought that it was really smart. He also has a podcast out called Gloves Off, which is geared towards Canadians. And it asks the question, what should Canada make of all of this? And how can Canada really compete and survive the threats coming from the United States and specifically from Donald Trump? I highly recommend everybody listen to it because it really gives you a good idea of what Canada has kind of been going through if you're an American. And if you're a Canadian, it is a really honest assessment of where we are in the country and kind of some big threats and some opportunities. But he also has fascinating guests like Anna Applebaum, Barbara Walter, and honestly, my favorite guest, which was Margaret Atwood, who is the author of A Handmaid's Tale and was also just a huge political activist and has been from the 60s onward. She has some really amazing insights and just absolutely worth a listen no matter where you live. I do think that if you're an American living in the United States, that his books and his podcast have really helped me to have a different perspective. I think that oftentimes if you are inside the bottle, you can't really read the label. And he has a very fascinating perspective and has talked to a couple of 100 experts in the world on all of these issues. So I really hope that you enjoy the show, and we'll first of all have this week's episode, which focuses mostly on politics as it relates to the US in general. And then next week, we'll talk more about what physicians need to take from all of this as well. So I hope that you enjoy the podcast. This is Stephen Marche. I did a poor job of introducing you there, but would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where you went to school?
Well, I'm originally from Alberta in northern Canada, Edmonton, Alberta. So pretty far north. For a while, I was a professor in New York, at the City College of New York, where I was a Shakespeare professor. And then my wife got a job in Toronto. We moved back in 2008, I want to say. We also had young children, and it just we didn't have the money to survive in New York with a couple kids and working as writers. So we moved back to Toronto, but I certainly have spent most of my working life in America. I write principally for magazines like the New Yorker, the Atlantic, the New York Times, places like this. My publishers are in New York. My agent is in New York. I definitely have felt like I was a columnist at Esquire for 8 years. Right. And in 2016, I guess I really decided I reported on the first Trump inauguration, and that had a kind of fall of Rome vibe to me. And so I decided to kind of report out like what was happening in America. And so I crisscrossed the country. I went all over Iowa and Oklahoma and Texas and the South and West Virginia and so on. And then I talked to about 200 experts on what was going on in American political life. And the conclusion of that was a book called The Next Civil War, which was, the title's pretty self-explanatory, but the conclusion that I came to. Then after that, the other book that's sort of in that series or not in that series, but sort of in the same vein, is I co-wrote, a novel with Andrew Yang, the former mayoral candidate for New York and presidential candidate. And he gave me a sort of inside view on, the American political class and the sort of functioning of American politics, like horse race politics. And that, the depression that I was in after the next Civil War, how dark things looked then, 5 minutes talking to Andrew's people made me think, oh my God, it's like 20 times worse than I thought. So those have been sort of the works that I've done in that sort of vein. And then I also did a recent podcast called Gloves Off, which is kind of about how Canada can survive an American collapse, which is a very thorny question. And very difficult to answer.
Well, and you had some fascinating guests on that as well. And I would encourage everybody to go and listen to that, whether you're American, you're a Canadian. It's very, very fascinating. And even interviewed Anne Applebaum and Margaret Atwood, which was just really, really fascinating amongst a lot of other. Yeah,
we got a lot of really amazing people that had, because it's such a new question. It's like literally never a question anyone's ever faced. Like, what should Canada do to resist the United States? I mean, never even occurred to me.
It's an absurd question.
It's an absurd question, right? And so because of that, getting the answers that people have are not typical, right? It's not like the answers they thought of 700 times and given 800, given 700 responses at various conferences or things like that. They're thinking about this in a different way. So that was definitely very interesting to talk to those people.
Yeah. So I would recommend, especially all the Canadians who are listening, you need to go and listen to that because it is really fascinating and it's instructive. But for Americans too, I think that that's a really interesting way to see how the view of Canadians has changed about Americans, but not all Americans, of course. But no, it's really, really fascinating.
Well, Atwood said at the end, I mean, I thought the most interesting remark in the whole thing is Atwood was like, the most important thing about this new nationalism is don't be anti-American. That's the number one thing. Yep. It was her number one piece of advice, because she said the line that is running through the world runs through America, and it runs through Ukraine, and it runs through Europe, and it runs through Korea and Japan too. And we're all on this line now, right? And we're all on this line between democracy and authoritarianism. And I mean, it's just America's turn right now. And I think that, coming from Margaret Atwood, that's a pretty fascinating take, given that, the 1960s and 70s, she was like the height of anti-Americanism. So.
Yeah. And she has a lot of really interesting takes in that, in your interview with her. She's still very fascinating.
Oh my God. Yeah. Oh my God. So 85 I encourage sharp as a tack. I mean, like no, not the slightest decline. Not even a little bit.
No,
not an iota.
Yeah. And with her predictions, I would everybody needs to go and listen to that because she has some pretty astounding predictions that, seem really,
they seemed a bit crazy to me at the time, but now increasingly it's like they're really hurting poor people in a way that doesn't make any sense. Like it's not helping the nation, but they're still doing it anyway. It makes a little more sense the farther we go along here.
Well, so in the book, The Next Civil War, you did describe some kind of 5 scenarios that would either lead to civil war directly or to kind of the collapse of American society as you know about it. Can you kind of describe your thoughts about all of this and why you think that that's likely, or and also kind of define what civil war is? Because I don't think that what anybody is envisioning is, we think that it's ridiculous that like the West Coast states are going to start marching, through Utah and going and they're not going to stop until they hit New York. That's not what's being described here, right?
No. I mean, what we're talking about is modern 21st century political violence, which is, the definitions, like the one thing I really wanted with the next Civil War is to be super precise about terminology, because I feel like so much of the rhetoric around American politics, it just gets super heated. And then these terms start to lose all meaning, like even things like the left and the right. I mean, like, what are you talking about anymore? Like, I wanted to be really precise. So the threshold for civil war defined by PRIO, the Peace Research Institute at Oslo, is 1,000 combatant deaths a year. Civil disturbance starts at 50, right? So America is already at civil disturbance levels of political violence. I mean, even if it reached 1,000 combatant deaths a year, I'm not super sure that would be relevant, because America's just so big. And it's so diverse. It's so geographically diverse. It's so, like, when they use it, the thousand deaths, combatant deaths line, they're talking about places like Liberia, right? And right. Chile and Guatemala and places like this, which are just meaningfully different from the functioning of the United States. But that said, what I'm really talking about here is rising levels of political violence to the point where basically everyday life becomes impossible. Like the lower end of that would be the Troubles in Ireland, or the Days of Lead in Italy. And the upper, like the worst case scenario of that would be Syria during its civil war, where essentially you have a fracturing into, so it's not one side against another. It's not red versus blue. It's not the states lined up against, like, with a line going through Kentucky or whatever. What we're dealing with here is like fragmenting, fracturing, sectionalism that leads to increases of violence. And then the problem is, when the violence starts, the attempts to suppress violence lead to more violence, which is the lesson the U.S. military has been learning for about 80 years, right? That, like, if you go into these places and you try to suppress violence, the JP-32, the manual, or 24, I'm sorry, the field manual for counterinsurgency, basically the advice is don't do it. Like, don't get involved in this. And like, it's not possible to win. You can maybe not lose for a while, but you cannot really win. And of course, taking that into the American context, this is not a people that are going to be very obedient. Would you want to, like, try and run American cities with Alaska gates and everyone? I mean, what we're seeing in Chicago right now is not a million miles from that, right? I think we already are in a state that is fully comparable to the Troubles in Ireland or the Days of Lead in Italy, where political violence is being effective. It's more important than political speech, and it's starting to build, and it's starting to spiral. And how far it goes, nobody knows. The questions you have to ask yourself then are, how much will to violence is there in the American people? Which is a question where it seems to me like there's a lot of will to violence.
Yeah. I mean, 5 years ago, there was a lot of will for violence. 10 years ago, there was a lot of will for violence. We all know somebody who has been in a shooting. We all know somebody who, is a victim of some sort of violence.
So the process of the book was really, like, I did these 5 scenarios, but the truth is, these models that were like the models that I took from Civil War experts, the models that I took from agricultural experts, economic experts, environmental experts, I tried to get the best available models, and there are some superb when a hurricane hits New York, they know to the street what will happen. Right. Like the models are really incredibly accurate. I mean, some of them are stronger than others, but some of them are very, very accurate indeed. And I sort of what I tried to do is take those models and sort of stitch them together into some kind of synthesis, and then create scenarios where it was basically putting flesh on the bones. So nobody knows what's going to happen, and nobody knows what the future will bring, but the models really go in one direction, and the direction is towards political violence. More political violence. And so that was really the point of the book, was to sort of present those models in a way that was palatable so that people could read them.
Well, it's very personalized. And for me, I mean, I think that the hurricane hitting New York, I lived in New Orleans. My wife and I both lived in New Orleans when Hurricane Katrina hit. And that is very personal for me. And that was 20 years ago now. It's early October 2025 right now. But that was very personal to me. And I felt all of that. We were fortunate that we had family outside that we could go and evacuate to, and that we had a car, and that we were med students at the time, and my wife was pregnant. It's not like we had a ton of money, but we did have a little bit of renter's insurance, which gave us some money. We had a lot of family that could support us. And we had an entire university. We were in our third year of med school at the time. And we had an entire university that was trying to support us and help us to go on. But there was a real possibility for a month that we just had 2 years of med school that we had paid for, and that was it. And if we did not have all of the outside help, and we think about the hundreds of thousands of people who were in New Orleans and who then evacuated and were refugees in Houston and Memphis and Atlanta and moved all over the country. And they were really without help for a very long time. And a lot of people relied on just the generosity of strangers for months. It was not the federal government who did a lot of help and who provided a lot of help at first. And that's really personal to me. And I think that if you take a city that has, an 18 million people kind of in the metropolitan area, and all of a sudden you push them, some of the richest people in America, and also some of the poorest, I will certainly say, but if you push all of them out to the rest of the United States, I don't get it. I don't see how that happens.
And the amazing thing was, like, when I was constructing that model, so that model was built off, partly these researchers at SUNY who'd done the floodplain research so they literally can tell, like, oh, you're on this street. If a level 4 hurricane hits you underwater, if it's a level 3, you're fine, right? The guy who said that a hurricane was going to hit, he's a reinsurance modeler. So those are the people who do insurance among insurance companies. So literally those models are no expenses spared. Like $1 trillion bets are made on the basis of those models, right? They are the most serious models. And he said it was a matter of time before a category 4 hurricane hit New York. He said there's a couple of things that can't be reinsured. One is that, and one is Tokyo. Because the thing about New York is that it's not just the people, it's that there's so much invested in every square kilometer of infrastructure in New York, underground. It's not like New Orleans, where New Orleans is a charming town. I've loved New Orleans, but like, it's not Manhattan. Right. It's not like the level of density of investment just simply in infrastructure per square kilometer. And it would all be, totally destroyed. And then what would happen to the people? New Orleans caused major social disruptions in Texas that were well documented. Right. And suddenly you got like 5 million New Yorkers and then the refugee podcast for that. And then meanwhile, they had a plan for the wall and Donald Trump killed it, right? Like any attempt to mitigate this was ruined because he thought it would affect the skyline, the view from Battery Park, basically. These are the kind of bad decisions that lead to, that when they talk about what a sociologist call a complex cascading system, which was sort of what I based the model on. Like, it's not one thing. Like, it's not, the problems that are afflicting America, it's not one thing. It's the way that they build on each other. So like, you have an environmental crisis in Guatemala. That sends a flood of refugees north. That leads to crisis at the border. That leads to Donald Trump being elected. Donald Trump makes the seawall go away in New York. That means New York is way more vulnerable to hurricanes than and then when it hits, of course, it's totally devastating. But the amazing thing is, like, there was a totally almost equivalent disaster in Los Angeles, right? And with the fires, the amount of capital destroyed, the amount of investment property money destroyed in that single incident is mind-boggling. It is simply a catastrophe, an economic catastrophe of just vast proportions, and never just taking out the human element of cost of all the pain that goes with it. But the sheer economic brutality of that moment. And the government does, not only are you on, but it's your fault for living in LA. It's a astonishing kind of abrogation of just government itself. We should run things together because they run better when we run them collectively. That whole spirit seems to have disappeared. Well, the funny thing is the New York scenario, which has not happened, is the one that has the highest likelihood of happening because the models are, as I said, they're based on reinsurance models. They're the
right.
gold
People are
standard.
making money bets that's going to happen or not going to happen.
Enormous bets. Like Singapore insurance companies, like they're making bets that are the size of, global, countries' whole GDPs on the basis of those models all the time. It's not like here's a model of like from a Peace Research Institute guy in Oslo who has this, which is, they can be good and they can work and so on. But no one's losing sleep if he's wrong. If they're wrong, like lots and lots of people are going to go bankrupt.
Yeah, that's very true. So you kind of caution, and I think that people feel this more and more, that you feel like there are places that you can't go or you won't go in the United States. And that what you're arguing is that there's just going to come a time where it is going to either be enforced that way, that there really are just going to be, like you said, gates that are coming down around the cities or, certain areas. Is that what you're, seeing?
Well,
right now, again, early, kind of what's happening in Chicago or Portland
Well, the thing that's happening in Chicago is obviously, psyops. Like they're doing this in a very dramatic way so that they get good video clips so that they can post it on YouTube and look like badasses.
Right.
That's not a real military operation, right? Like that's not run by anyone who has an effective aim. What's the point of going into some apartment block and zip tying everybody, 50% of whom turn out to be American citizens? That's not a real operation. That's a spectacle. Right. But the violence that's building eventually will demand a response. Right. And like the Charlie Kirk assassination was a good example of this, right? Where like you have this serious political violence, like coming for journalists. You have the left absolutely, like huge chunks of the left being in agreement with the assassination or saying some version of I had it come, these are the kind of things that lead to breakdowns. Right. Where you have when I wrote the book, certainly when I published the book, up until very recently, right-wing violence was totally dominant. Like it would have been I think when I published the book, it was 56% was right-wing violence, and 4% was left-wing violence. And up till recently, that was still more or less true. I think the last report was in 2023 it was 60% Republican right wing, 10% left wing. But I think the next year we're going to see a real shift where like there has just been a far greater amount of left wing violence, and that's complementary radicalization. That's the classic model of how this works. Like one side gets more violent, the other side gets more violent. The extremes build, the extremes get more power. People feel powerless in the middle. They feel they're incapable of making real political change just through speech. So they pick up weapons, right? And then suddenly things take on a logic of their own, right? And that's what we really have to fear, is things taking on a logic of their own.
Well, that's really interesting that you say that. I know that on the Gloves Off that you interviewed Barbara Walter, who is like the civil, like a Civil War expert, that she worked for the CIA as a contractor of, going through and figuring out what, which countries were most likely to be involved in a civil war. And in her book, How Civil Wars Start and How to Stop Them, I think is what it is. But I listened to that a few years ago as I was driving a lot. And her thesis was that violence starts to happen when you lose hope, when you feel like my vote no longer matters, the courts no longer matter, that nobody's going to, and that is when violence starts. And so hearing you say that, I hadn't really thought about that until just now, but that's really interesting to hear you say that and to see that the people who have always, leaned more towards peaceful resistance and, through the civil rights movements in the 60s, that are now saying, well, that's not really gotten us anywhere. And so we're going to become more violent.
Yeah, well, you just feel like your vote doesn't count, right? And also that, I mean, the real one is not necessarily the political structure, although that's can be quite catastrophic in itself. But when the legal system starts to lose its legitimacy, when you feel like the legal system is just like a captured spoil of essentially a political war, that's when things really start to go haywire pretty quickly. I mean, that's what happened in Chile, and that's what happens everywhere. I mean, Barbara built her own model, right? She's a proper political scientist. I'm just a journalist, right? But no, there's like I can synthesize things, but she actually built her own model. But her model showed what a bunch of them show, which is that democracies are very stable and autocracies are very stable. But when you're in between, when you're in the gray zone, anocracy is what Barbara calls it. That's when the danger comes, right? That's when the violence starts to spring. And I think that's exactly what America is in right now, right? It's in a mild form of authoritarianism. It's in between a democracy. It's actually unclear right now whether it is a democracy or it's something else or what is good. I mean, and the thing is, like, what Anne Applebaum talks about and what you can see in a lot of these places is that it goes back and forth. It regains, and this happens in lots of countries, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic, even England, right? Like certain rights get lost and they come back, and like like the free press is gone and then it comes back and then it goes away again, right? And so this battle is sort of, it's not set. Right? Like, it's not like when you lose it, it's lost forever. It's just that there's this battle back and forth between them. Yeah. And that battle itself is very dangerous. That's when the violence starts to really manifest itself.
It's all terrifying. So.
Yeah. It's funny. I've been dealing with it for so long now that it doesn't feel terrifying to me, because it's just it's just like a pattern that plays itself out. Yeah. I mean, the question is, when are they going to get sick of living like this? Like, that's sort of what happens to all these. Like, the Irish got to a place where, like, why are we living this way? We just can't, like, why can't our children go to school without worrying about being shot? Like, they were blown up. Like, there is an end to this process too. Like, there is a rebuild there is, because one of the things that's also people don't really think about, because we think about like the vulnerabilities in democracies and so on, but living in an authoritarian state is garbage. It's garbage, right? Like, in Turkey, the current, if you want to borrow money from the central bank, it starts at 33%. No one can build a life there, right? Like, no, like, the inflation is so out of control. Like, you can't build a life in these places. Like, the Russian economy has shrunk by 14% over the past 3 years. Like, no one is having a decent, ordinary life where you just have children and a job and, do your best and to keep love alive. Like, authoritarian societies are really, really inherently unstable. They are dysfunctional, right? For obvious reasons. Like, like the idea that the trains run on time or something like that, it's just not true. They fall apart. They daily life and ordinary activities become really, really grotesque and rapidly.
So is this from kind of the institutional collapse and kind of the hyperpartisanism and the political divides? Is that, and you talk about gridlock and the collapse of the US, of the institutions. So how do you think that that's going to happen? I mean, we're already starting to see gridlock right now. The government is currently shut down. That's not the only time that this has happened. And so sometimes people kind of write this off. Is this going to be worse? How do you predict that things are going to happen in the near future? Because honestly, I have a lot of doctors. The reason I'm making this is because I have so many doctors who are emailing me because I was a US physician who moved to Canada. Right. And I did that 5 years ago. And I've put out some videos about this, and I have people constantly emailing me now. And every single time that something happens in the news, I don't even have to look at the news to know. It's how many people are now in my inbox who are asking, how the hell do I get out of this? And I think that there are a lot of people who are starting to wake up to this of, it is becoming oppressive. It is becoming, I can't relax anymore. I can't enjoy my life anymore. And is this more of what you're talking about in the day-to-day life, at least at this point, or?
Yeah. Look, I mean, despite the book, I don't really like predictions, because you're always wrong. Like, and if you're right, it's just an accident. Nobody knows what the future is going to bring. Like, nobody knows. Certainly I don't. But I would say, it just seems to me there are a couple of phenomenon that are the militarization of the federal government and its use as a tool against blue states. There are a couple of things that can emerge from that. We're already starting to hear people like Pritzker, people like the governor of California. And that's funny, but they all come to Canada and they already talk to us like they're sovereign countries, right? One of the things that's a key fact in this division in the United States is that 70% of GDP comes from Democrat voting counties, right? So if you're looking at a state like Massachusetts, where they basically fund the state of Oklahoma, right? Like Massachusetts is one of the most successful societies in human history ever, right? And the current Trump administration is doing everything they can to annihilate the basis of that, right? They're destroying the research capacity of this incredible place, right? That has, other than being rude to everybody, has basically solved like every other problem of human society, right? Like they don't have good manners, but like if you're looking at it from 30,000 feet in the air, like Massachusetts is one of the best places that human beings have ever existed in, right? As its functioning society. How long are they going to wait and have it all ripped apart from them? Like, how long are they going to have that, like the basis of because it's not just, it's like prosperity. Like, it's not, the basis of their prosperity is going to be destroyed here. And that goes tenfold for California. People, one thing that is really weird about America is how they forget how rich they are, right? Like, California is like the richest place in the world by 20,000 GDP per capita. Like the next one is like, I think it's New York State, but like Canada, Britain, Italy, Japan, whatever, every other country in the world, like is 20,000 less per person GDP than California, right? It's just a hugely productive society. And the H-1B visa thing, you're basically cutting their Achilles heel, cutting their Achilles tendon to, on this prosperity. All I want to say here is that some kind of soft secession, some kind of like removal of, already the federal system is so obviously dysfunctional. It's shut down right now. Yeah. No one seems to be making any effort to restore it. Like, it doesn't seem like it's not like people are like, well, what's going to happen today? No. It's like, this is going to go on for a long time. And
current markets are, I think Kalshi is betting that it's going to last more than 21 days at this point, and probably longer. So like, you already have a non-functioning federal government. But that's really just, that's me fantasizing. Like, I think the models in the book are, those are real models that have predictive capacities, and they predict a lot more violence, right? That's what, like, that's probably what we should tell your listeners, right? It's not a question necessarily of like the horse race politics aspect. What is Newsom going to say here? What is Pritzker going to do? If I were Pritzker, I would be freaking out. I think he is freaking out. You have gun battles between various levels of government workers in the streets of Chicago. Like, this is not sustainable, right? This is no way to live. Like, you can't live this way for long, right? Yeah. And, it's also not like Trump has a victory plan, right? Like, it's not like there's some plan to, like, for him to win. This is all for display and all for some kind of like horrific narcissism. So it's, so that doesn't have any conclusion to it, right? There's no like natural thing where it's like, well, he'll get this and then it'll be over. That's not happening either. So, the only thing I feel relatively confident, not even predicting, but saying the models demonstrate, is more political violence, which is a nightmare, right? That's what makes life unbearable. When you send your kids to school and you don't know if the bus is going to get blown up. That's what's unendurable. Yes. Is the violence. There were times, and I don't know why, but it got to the point where it was a nightmare of myself and my wife that there was going to be a school shooting. And after we left, Uvalde, Texas happened, where the parents weren't
Right.
allowed to go in. They're standing out there listening to all of this. In Nashville, we had friends who in the Covenant School, that there was a mass shooting there, and that we had friends who were in the area, who had kids in the area at the school across the street.
Oh my God.
And that he received a text message initially saying that your kid's school was under attack. And, or that there were initially reports that it was his kid's school that was under attack. And they had to get a message a few minutes later saying, no, it's not your kid's school. But that's the worst, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for watching this episode. This is absolutely not a topic that I really ever want to discuss. And this is not a topic that I find pleasant or something that I really want to benefit off of. But I think it's really important, because anytime that I talk to an American physician right now, one of the most important things that they talk about is the safety of their children. I hope that this discussion at least stimulated some thought and maybe helped change some perspectives and given you some perspective. I certainly only look at things in what it means to me in my life today, and not what it means to other people, and not what it is going to mean and what my life will look like when bad things start happening. I hope that you come back and listen to next week's discussion as we talk a little bit more about doctors specifically and what it's going to look like for U.S. physicians going forward and what history tells us is going to happen. I really appreciate you, and I look forward to all of your comments, and I love to hear what you have to say. Thank you. See you next week. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Interesting MD podcast. Please check out my content on YouTube at Interesting MD, and follow me on TikTok, Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, and Facebook at The Interesting MD, and on X at Interesting MD. If you have comments or questions and want to get in touch with me or any of my guests, please DM me on socials or email me at rob@interestingmd.com. If you have any ideas for a show and you want to share your hobbies with me, or don't know where to get started on your own project, you can email ideas@interestingmd.com. Please like and subscribe to the podcast and YouTube channel to get the latest content. Much appreciation to Falter Media for editing, producing, and posting all Interesting MD content. Check them out, because if they can do this for me, imagine what they can do for you. See you next week.